Support this podcast at patreon.com/Kris Karl Photography Podcast. I like to start these off with a bit of an outline of who you are and how you got into photography. So what age did you find photography and for what reason?
So I'm a very late adopter, in fact, because if you go back to school and all the way through my education, I hated art. I hated anything to do with visual artistry. I considered myself, I still am, a horrible painter and drawer. I was terrible at sculpture, and I used to honestly say, and this is no joke, I used to say I was somehow allergic to the art school and the art rooms. I was just like, this is not my place. I used to do a huge amount of acting instead, and I very strongly believed that I was not a visual person, that I was an artistic person, but not someone that saw the world in a visual way. I was much more someone that used language and performance to express myself. And that was something that continued. I went into radio journalism, and which spoke very neatly to the acting side, because obviously there's a sort of performance element there. And through all of that, I did a really good job of reporting lots of very interesting things and not taking any photos of any of it. And then I went to Congo as the correspondent for Reuters, and that was probably where my love of photography really started. And that was when I was about sort of 29, 30. And what happened was that I got there and I found myself the proud sort of temporary owner of thousands of dollars worth or thousands of pounds worth of computer gear, of camera gear, basically a pair of Canon 5Ds and a a plethora of lenses and all the rest of it, which was supposed to be the kit for the correspondent to take and create these fantastic images. And I hated those cameras. I hated them so much because I didn't understand how they worked. They were incredibly heavy. I could occasionally coax a wonderful photo out of them, which made me realize that they were brilliant cameras, but I could only do it very occasionally. And there was actually one incredibly embarrassing point where for about 2 weeks, I could only get the camera to take blank pictures, and I didn't know what I'd done to it to make it do that. And I eventually had to call our sort of videographer and say, look, please, can you press some buttons and make it start taking proper photos again? But I really resented it. So I pushed that away, and I went more and more out into the field in Congo. And Congo is probably one of the most visually striking places, or certainly one of the most visually striking places I've ever visited. And I also, as a journalist, had this extraordinary access to stories, to people, to places. And again, I was really not taking photos, and this started to bother me more and more. So eventually, I picked up one of those little Fuji X10s. I don't know whether you remember them. One of the ones with the sort of small sensors, like the start of the X line. And I picked up that camera and I just sort of had it then with me for the rest of the time that I was in Congo. And I loved the fact that it was sort of portable and pocketable, and that I was able to just document stuff as it was happening to me, that it didn't need to become a huge disruption from my job, which was obviously to write. And to report through other means. But then being in this place, which had extraordinary visual power, and then also being alongside some really, really incredibly talented photojournalists, I feel like it almost was a process of osmosis, that I probably learned far more about things like composition, things about how to attempt to sort of convey emotion and storytelling and narrative in pictures than I ever realized. And then I was able to to create some images that I was really pleased with, and that I got a real buzz from. And I think so that sowed the seeds. And then I sort of, as you do, you upgrade your gear and all the rest of it. And I started taking more and more photos. But for a long time, it was a side show to my journalistic work. And then then one of the reasons that it became more than a sideshow was that it also became, I had kind of issues around anxiety and stress, and particularly after Congo, a lot of kind of mental issues that I was struggling to deal with. And I actually then found photography became a very useful tool for helping me to sort of to manage some of that. And then it's become a more and more central part of who I am and sort of my way of expressing my artistry, I suppose.
I mean, you've mentioned Congo there, and you're now based in Sweden, originally from England. I've read that you've also lived in Madagascar and Turkey. Is that right?
Exactly, yeah.
Obviously there's going to be massive cultural differences between all of those places. I think even within those places, if you were to just move around, you would see cultural differences. But on a much more macro level, there's obviously going to be huge cultural differences between England, Turkey, Madagascar, Congo, Sweden, and so on. How does that inform your photography?
I think what I would say is that one of the things that I was very lucky to be able to do in all of those places was to be able to sort of to see life in the raw. And that was, that was obviously a kind of a central part of my job when I was there. As a journalist, you're expected to sort of to look at realities and to report on the day to day and also how the kind of the extraordinary in the kind of the events that you witness impacts on the ordinary. So I would say, like, across everywhere that I've reported, then it's been very much that I've tried to bring that sentiment and that sensibility onwards with my photography, which is to try and kind of capture kind of the rawness of life and kind of the everydayness and act as a sort of, for it to be a form of reportage. Then, in terms of how you approach photography in different countries, then, I think what I would say is that I think I'm very conscious of how whatever people say, I personally think that, depending on where you are, you have to have somewhat different approaches to your photography if you're going to be successful, dependent on where you are. So, for example, in Madagascar, whilst, to be honest, I did not take a great deal of photographs in Madagascar, it was a relatively easy place to operate as a photographer. You got a lot of leeway as a foreigner to be able to kind of to move around and to witness. To snap away. And then you would go to somewhere like DR Congo, where parts of the country were relatively easy to operate as a photographer, although, obviously with some fairly significant risks attached. But then Kinshasa, the capital, which is where I was based. So in a bit of history on Congo, it was illegal to take photographs in public under the dictatorship of Mobutu for many, many years. And so the Congolese relationship to photography is a very, very complex and often quite hostile one, and certainly in the west of the country and certainly in Kinshasa, to the point where, I mean, if you kind of have a look on the web, there's very little street photography of Kinshasa because you can't take it. Because if you try and take street photos in Kinshasa, you will be attacked. And that happened to me, where I was out with my assistant, who is a Congolese, and he wasn't a Quinois, but he knew all of the people. He knew the street in Quinois better than anybody. Fantastic contact, and part of his job was to sort of keep me kind of safe and keep me kind of being able to operate. And we were just trying to go out and take some pretty basic street shots there, not focusing on any individual people, fairly wide angle, and not in any of this kind of intrusive street photography that you see from any number of other places, and to a degree street photography that I've done myself. And within about 30 seconds of doing this, we had maybe 3 or 4 people around us. Within about a minute and a half of doing this, we had maybe 20 people around us. And then a couple of people pretending to be policemen saying, "Where's your authorization?" Because you're supposed to, well, it's certainly tradition, you were supposed to have a document saying you had sort of special authorization from the government to be able to take photos. That wasn't the case anymore, but, people were still kind of, that was their reality. And also, could they try and shake me down for money? And within about maybe 3 or 4 minutes, we were surrounded by 40 or 50 people. And it started off kind of, what would I say, kind of aggressively curious. And then it quite quickly just became aggressive. And people saying you're a spy, you're a this or that. And, we ended up basically having to back and eventually kind of run for it and jump in our car and get out of there. So it was a really, really complex place to take photos. And so that, I think, was really interesting, because it meant that, the only way you could take candid photos in Kinshasa really was either to do it very sneakily, and that was something that I certainly at the time would not have had the confidence to do, or that you did it once you'd built relationships with people. And I did that through sort of my Congolese kind of friends and contacts who were able to sort of help me build relationships with people so that you could then take photos of them. So then coming to places like Turkey and Sweden, which are, I would say, more Western, kind of more closer to what you would expect in kind of Europe or the USA, then it's felt easier to take photos in public and to take candid photos in public, because you're not faced with that same sort of kind of bureaucratic and kind of cultural hostility that I faced in Congo. But then on the flip side, to be honest, has anywhere inspired me visually as much as Congo? No. So, it's the place I would love to go back to and take photographs with the confidence that I have now, and the fact that I'm that much more streetwise, I guess, in the way I go about my photography. I'm more comfortable in my identity or my role as a photographer than I ever was there. So I'd love to go back there and see whether I could kind of, do a better job of trying to represent this, this extraordinary kind of visual country and visual culture.
I mean, to take a little bit of a turn on this, something I'm noticing more and more, especially with the sort of democratization of people being more noticeable through social media, is that terminology is becoming quite wishy-washy, and people are labeling things with maybe not the right label for what they actually are. One of these things is journalism and street photography seem to become quite intertwined, and people who are just out taking street photos are calling themselves photojournalists. What's the real difference between photojournalism and street photography?
Oh, that's it's not an easy question.
I'm not going to lie, that's a super loaded question. I do apologize.
Yeah, and I apologize in advance if I fall into any large traps. But I would say, I think that photojournalism tends to broadly deal with events. So kind of events that have some sort of newsworthy quality to them, which is not to say that they're always of politicians or always of big actors or of wars or of earthquakes. They can be of real life, but that real life is always depicted in relation to a newsworthy event. And I suspect, we're going to see a huge wave of that in the post kind of pandemic world, with the kind of, if economies collapse as much as people fear they will, then there's going to be a huge amount of this sort of reportage of real lives, candid real lives, which will look very much like kind of possibly street photography, but actually kind of plays into that kind of much bigger narrative of kind of economic depression, poverty, loss of employment, those sorts of things. So I think you could probably say that is where, broadly speaking, you could kind of, that's how I would define photojournalism. Street photography, I think it is fair to say, has taken a huge amount stylistically and in terms of approach from photojournalism, documentary, reportage, those sorts of approaches to journalism, and then applied it to the everyday life, the mundane life that doesn't necessarily have a wider narrative attached to it. And which is no, and again, look, I think it's really like these definitions are blurred. So, at one end, you have someone who will be reporting absolutely hard news, something like the Black Lives Matter demonstration or something like that, that really, it's something that's going to appear, that picture is going to appear on the front page of a newspaper the next day. But then you could have someone who is doing some journalistic work very much on the fringes, which is much more about kind of exploring maybe the lives of people who go to those demonstrations, or the lives of people who oppose them or whatever, and taking photos of them in their living rooms. You could absolutely argue that they're both still journalism, but they're kind of perhaps different ends of the spectrum. And then the same with sort of street photography, where, you might kind of have one street photographer who is, taking pictures of people, dressed in funny clothing just because it might raise a smile, it might make people laugh, and it just captures a nice little absurd moment in life, all the way through to someone who is trying to document some of the social ills that they see around them every day through their street photography. And then you're kind of on the borders of reportage or possibly photojournalism. I think it does raise a really interesting question about street photography, and then which is morals of street photography, which is, one of the big ones has always been, do you take photos of homeless people, for example? It's personally something that I try not to do. But could you argue that because you as an individual are wanting to portray the reality of poverty in the area where you live, even if it is only a reality that you're trying to portray to your small group of Facebook friends or whatever, do you thus, as it were, have a moral right to take that photo? And this is the kind of the photo I'm talking about, where you haven't necessarily built up a relationship with the subject or all the rest of it. Do you have the moral right to have that photo? And I think, there is an argument to say, yes, you do, because you are bearing witness. And that's an inherent part of photography across the board. And it perhaps plays a more important role in photojournalism than it does in, fine art or product photography. But actually, this idea of bearing witness to a reality in front of the lens is something that we all buy into. So maybe you do have the right to do that. It's not, I don't have an absolute answer to it, but I think it raises some really interesting questions. And I think that all of these distinctions are becoming more and more blurred. What I would say, though, when it comes to journalism and photojournalism, and this is something that I feel really strongly, is that it's very easy to say, okay, we almost don't need journalists anymore. And don't get me wrong, journalists are a long way from being perfect. But as a journalist, as a trained journalist, you are brought up, you are educated on, things like kind of media law and media ethics. I'm fully aware that some journalists seem to take on board that training rather more than others. But the idea ought to be that you are kind of governed both, at a professional level, but also at a personal level by some sort of moral and professional code. And that is something that we should value in the way we get our information, be it visual or non-visual, because you realize, or you hopefully can put a degree of trust in the kind of the quality or the veracity or the ethics behind the information you're receiving, whereas you don't necessarily get that from someone who has none of that background. But then, is that to say that anyone who's not a journalist somehow has nefarious purposes and can't do absolutely incredible, powerful, honest reportage? No, totally not. Of course they can. And as we all know, on the flip side, there are many journalists who behave appallingly. But I think everything's becoming so blurred, and I think it's problematic.
Yes. I mean, to circle back on the homeless issue, I think one of the biggest cultural things that we're seeing at the moment, and it's a very bizarre one to kind of, if you pull yourself really far back and look at it in a general sense, people that are going on very, very expensive holidays to photograph impoverished people is a really fascinating look into sort of the general psyche of more prominent cultures. It's a very bizarre one.
And there's a sense of entitlement that allows you to feel that you can do that. And I think that's something that, that's something that as a journalist and as a, kind of a white Western journalist, that's something that I've undoubtedly been able to, kind of profit from, is that sort of sense of entitlement that I can go into, a village in, be it Madagascar, be it DRC, be it kind of rural Turkey, and take photos because hey, I can. Now, it isn't, I think as a journalist, hopefully it's not as simple as that, because you also feel that you are, going back to this idea of bearing witness, you are also trying to tell a story. You are also trying to depict a reality that might, in an ideal world, lead to sort of, some sort of positive changes. But let's be honest, that's a justification that you very rarely run past the people you're taking photos of, or indeed quoting, or indeed writing about. You use that justification to yourself, and damn well get on with doing your job. Now, and as you say, you're now kind of referencing people who go on holiday and take those pictures. Would those same people go to the poorer areas of their own local city and take those photos? I somewhat doubt it.
Right.
Which then I think, it poses all sorts of questions. Yeah, as you say, and with questions that are very topical now. And obviously we're not going to get political, but, really interesting questions about, the sort of like the post-colonial society that we live in, or the post-imperial society that we live in, and the hierarchy on a global scale that we still have. And I think that, more and more people are going to start questioning that, and which I think will create challenges for photographers. And maybe, both kind of, both rightly and wrongly. I think one of the things that I really feel is that I don't think that there is a single moral code that should dictate how you approach your photography, whoever you are, whether you are a photojournalist, whether you're the most famous photographer in the world, or whether you're someone that kind of picks up your camera for 2 weeks a year to kind of take pictures on your holidays. I don't think that there is any one way to tell you that to behave. Of course, there's some kind of basic guidelines that I think we'd all get behind, showing respect and, kind of decency, and not taking pictures of children, or, whatever. But, we could probably come to a list of, kind of 10 do's or don'ts. But I think, like a lot of things in life, I think it's not necessarily the kind of the place that you come to in terms of what you decide is acceptable or not acceptable. What I think is really important is that you do consider the morality of what you're doing. You do consider the ethics and the impact that your photography has on the people you photograph. And that you are able to justify to yourself and to others, they may not agree with you, but you're able to justify to yourself or to others why you have taken a photograph, hopefully beyond just saying, because I wanted to get a few likes on Facebook. And that, in a way, that was how I kind of used to approach how I approached my journalism, was that kind of, journalism's not rocket science, but it should be morally difficult. Every story you do should be morally difficult. It should challenge you. It should make you feel a bit uncomfortable. And I feel it's the same with photography. You should feel a bit uncomfortable about your photography, because if you're not feeling, if you're taking candid photos. I mean, if you're taking pictures of like kind of still life, that's probably not quite as relevant. But if you're taking candid pictures of people, street photography, you should be feeling a bit uncomfortable about what you're doing. Otherwise, you're probably not thinking hard enough about it.
Yeah, I think the non-controversial side of that, the non-photojournalist side of that, is if you're working in any kind of creative form and you're not feeling a certain degree of self-hatred, you're not really pushing yourself far enough out of your technical comfort zone. I think that would be the non-moralistic version.
I think I would totally agree with that. I think it's I've certainly found with photography, it is astonishing how much you can, how much time you can spend berating yourself for any number of any number of things. But actually, I think in a way that's one of the joys of photography for me, because as I said, it was something that I did or increasingly became something that I did to kind of deal with some sort of kind of mental issues around sort of anxiety and kind of obsessive thinking and all the rest of it. And it's not to say that photography hasn't caused me a huge amount of anxiety and indeed obsessive thinking. God, just me researching camera models. But you know what I mean? But actually the great thing is it's an awful lot more manageable stress than, am I a good person, or did I say something really stupid at that party 10 years ago? Right. And so I think that, I think photography, like a lot of things, plays for a lot of people into that sort of tortured artistic soul to a degree. And that's well and good, because I think we need these releases, a lot of us, to kind of to make life a little bit more livable.
I think what we're seeing at the moment, obviously with, as you mentioned, the protests that are going on, the pandemic, it seems to have been a year that's just finally justified 24-hour news in a sense. Culturally speaking, the importance of street photography, it's fascinating, because it almost feels like it's not present serving. It's almost like what you document now as a street photographer will start to bear more relevance and have more substance in years to come, as opposed to right now. And it feels like at the moment, because we're far too aware of the nostalgia of older things and the enjoyment of older things. I think fashion sense, we're always looking backwards in terms of what we've liked. We're always looking at earlier decades, that we're not doing a very good job of documenting now, because, for a really basic example, cars don't look as good as what they used to look. So people aren't photographing things that have current cars in them. And Mobile phones are obviously something that a lot of people, especially photographers, get very frustrated at, seeing people on their phones. It doesn't make for a very good photo, but it's culturally important to what's happening right now. Is there a danger that we're going to kind of lose the cultural importance by trying to make street photos look too good?
I think it's brilliant. I think you've got a really valid point. And I think actually the reason I'm laughing is I kind of have this amazing idea when you look at, and I hold my hand up, I'm completely guilty of this too. I love the filmic look. I love that sort of slightly grainy vintage look. But you have this image of people kind of in 100 years time looking at photos from like 2020 London and be like, bloody hell, it looks just like the 1960s did. Well, it didn't really, but no, too. I think we are kind of in the grip of a sort of like fetishizing nostalgia. But then equally, what I would say is that to a degree, that fetishization of nostalgia and how that is represented through our photography will also say something interesting about the society that we are living in today. That we felt the need to do that, but it is true. I think that. And it's something that I'm kind of trying to explore a lot with my photography at the moment now, is this idea of, as you say, kind of, are we trying to make our pictures look too good? And straight off, I'd say no, in the sense, I think you should make your pictures look exactly how you want them to look. Because I really strongly believe that it's not for anyone else to decide how your artistic vision expresses itself. On the flip side, of course, if you kind of go into the wilds of something like Instagram, there are certain styles that do very well, and there are certain styles that don't do so well. And if you go chasing the likes, which again, I'm sure a lot of us have done, and I'm not going to say that I've chased the likes and stuff in the part. I probably still do now. You might start, you start crafting your vision to kind of fit in with some of the kind of the modes, some of the trends, some of the visual trends that we have at the moment. And then, as you say, everything starts to take this sort of like kind of very unreal sheen. And I'm trying to kind of kick against that a little bit now with some of the stuff I'm doing. Actually, most of the stuff that I haven't posted yet, I'm trying to move a little bit away from that and trying to get kind of to stuff that's a little bit rougher and rawer. But then on the flip side, I see a lot of people who kind of I admire very much for the pursuit of their vision, who are taking, these really sort of quite flat, clearly quite unsort of post-processed images of street scenes, quite, possibly with not any particular focal point in it. And I kind of go, okay, cool, because I can see that you see something in that, and in its mundanity. But then the other part of me says, well, it doesn't do anything for me. It doesn't. Right. It doesn't hit me. It doesn't kind of, and certainly one of the things that I've discovered recently is that color is something that has become more and more important to me as a photographer. And I think that I kind of, whilst I can admire a lot of the sort of the murky and kind of moody tones that we get on, that you see on Instagram, and that indeed I have taken photos in those style, absolutely. I also kind of, I hope that people aren't going to think that that's how our world looked, but maybe the point is that's how the photographer's world looks. Do you know what I mean? Because we're all taking photographs of ourselves when we take photos. I think that lots of photographers have said that. And maybe, when you've got all of these murky and moody and dark pictures, what it's actually saying is that quite a lot of us are feeling murky and moody and dark, and not so many of us are feeling bright and happy and neon and splashing colourful.
I think this is the first time ever with any art form, and I'm absolutely fine with being completely wrong here, but I don't think there's any other more instantly gratifying art form than photography right now. Even music now, as digitized as it is, you still have a fairly long period to get an audience, whereas a photo can be taken, uploaded, and immediately consumed in a way that I don't think any other art form has. And I think there's a danger of, I actually don't think there's a danger. I think we're in a terrible, terrible grip of people being more conscious of the way their photo is received than of what's in their photo.
Absolutely, 100%. And I would challenge, almost, I'm sure there are some kind of very artistically strong and focused people, but almost all of us have been guilty of that at different points, of being more focused on the reception than on the subject and what we are trying to achieve. And then I feel like I probably fight against that every day, because I use Instagram a lot, but one of the main reasons that I use Instagram is actually as a form of curation for myself, in the sense that, I've got 2 young kids, life is very hectic and all the rest of it. And I really want to sort of to narrow and refine my photographic vision and my photographic voice. And I want to be able to see that visually for myself. And Instagram provides a very useful tool to do that. Is it lovely when I get lots of likes? Of course it is. And of course I want to build a following, and also I want to build a community of people that I can also learn from them. I've learned huge amounts from there, but absolutely this sort of like kind of get it up there, see how many likes you are, and then getting crushingly disappointed when actually that photo that you really liked actually got no likes at all. And then the photo that you thought was totally rubbish got loads of likes, and you're like, oh, maybe I should take more rubbish photos. And it's like kind of, I think it's really toxic. And then, I know that lots of photographers have talked about this idea that you should hold stuff back, sit on it for a while. And actually I've tried to do that, in the sense that, as a kind of, I felt like my photographic style has evolved. I haven't, I think the photographs I'm taking now are massively different from the stuff I've got up on Instagram now, currently, because there's probably a sort of 3 or 4 or 5 month lag between what I'm putting up on Instagram and the stuff I'm taking now. And I feel that my photography is in a state of quite big flux at the moment. And part of me thinks, oh God, I want to get this new stuff up really straight away, because I'm really happy with it. Like I personally, at this precise moment, feel that I'm taking the best photos I've ever taken. They're probably not that good, but for me, on my personal journey, I feel that they're the best I've ever taken. But I really feel that I do have a much better sense of how good or not they are 3 or 4 months down the line. And then actually the lovely thing is that then some photos I kind of get lost because I kind of lose track of it, and I kind of and then I come back to it and go, oh, that's the photo. I was so excited and I so nearly published it straight away because I was so chuffed about it. And sometimes I look at it and go, oh yeah, cool, I'm still really happy with that photo. And other times I look at it and go, yeah, actually it's not that good. And I think that, I think that that's has proved to me, at least, a really important part of my development as a photographer, in trying to become a better photographer, not compared to anybody else, not compared to any other photographer on Instagram, some of whom are fantastically talented and probably more talented and competent than I would ever be. And others who, I can, in my sort of more egotistical moments, think, oh, I'm better than them. But that doesn't matter. The point is about kind of your own personal kind of artistic journey. And I think that, rushing to put stuff up is a really bad way to kind of map that journey artistically for yourself.
Yeah, I think a really underrated skill and a massively overlooked part of sort of controlling your own output is just learning to disassociate your emotional connection with a photo and actually look at it from a technical point of view. Look at it from, does it convey the message that you want to convey? And it's something I didn't learn from photography until I started to become very prolific working in weddings. And I started to understand that I reverse engineered the idea that, so in weddings, you can have a bad photo, but because it carries a lot of emotional weight for what the moment was, it becomes a good photo to the people that matter.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when you reverse engineer that to stuff that doesn't have the same emotional leverage, if you start thinking, oh, well, I really liked photographing this place, or I really like photographing this person, you become way more invested in the experience than you do the photo. And then that's when I think your output drops, because you're trying to put out something that will never resonate with people in the same way that you have, because they didn't experience the capture. They only experienced the image itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, to a degree, and particularly in this day and age now where we are all generating, including people who would never in a million years describe themselves as photographers. In fact, those people, some of them are probably generating far more photos than photographers are generating, because we've got pictures, cameras on our phones and all the rest of it. We're generating so many bloody photos these days, so many images of the world, kind of good, bad, boring, all the rest of it. And one of the big things that I think is really important is the weight of any individual image. How much significance, as you say, like, does that image have? And where does that significance come from? And I think, somehow I think that if one is to kind of get, personal satisfaction from photography, you have to sort of establish ways to make, your individual image that you take, whether it's taken on an iPhone or, kind of the most expensive Leica, how does that photo have some sort of tangibility, some sort of longevity beyond, the click of the shutter button or it pinging up on your computer screen when you edit it? And I think, but I don't think there's any one way to give that. It could be that it has, personal weight to you when you took the photo, that, it was associated with such strong emotions when you took the photo, then that becomes important. It could be, as you say, and I think this is really important because this is about getting over the vanity and the ego of the photographer. It could be about the moment that it captures and the significance for the people in that photo. So as you say, quite often the photos that to you are the most mundane, when someone asks you to do a group photo, when you kind of like family have got together and all the rest of it, and you're a bit like, oh God, all right, do the group photo. And you're like, this is so boring. But actually that's the photo that people put on their walls and look back at and say, oh my gosh, didn't we have an amazing weekend getting together and blah, blah, blah. And that photo has weight. That photo has way more weight than any kind of artsy fartsy photo that I might take, sort of kind of like hanging upside down sort of through a chair leg kind of across a bar. Do you know what I mean? Because it actually says something. But then, which is not to say that then we should only be taking snapshots like that. But then the other way, I suppose, that you can give your photos weight, if they don't become photos that win awards and kind of go around the world for whatever reason, be it kind of photojournalism or fine art or whatever. But the other way is that they can be part of your photographic journey, as in, a way of developing your style. But then that requires you to kind of to embark on that journey in some sort of meaningful and engaged sense. So I think, but I think it's really important. And I've started shooting film recently for exactly kind of the same reason that lots of people shoot film, which is that I wanted to explore that idea of tangibility and having something kind of concrete in my hand, and I both get it and don't get it, in the sense that yes, it's fantastic to, and I've developed them all myself because I've been doing it during lockdown and stuff, and developing film in Sweden is insanely expensive. But like, I've been developing myself, and it's an incredible feeling when you see the negatives come out and you kind of look and you're like, cool, I did that. It's also then crushingly disappointing when you realize that an awful lot of your photos are rubbish. And then when they come, and then because I'm scanning them and they come up on the computer screen, and then I go, oh God, it's just another digital image on a screen again. So it's sort of, do you know what I mean? Like it's a real battle, and I think it's a real challenge to keep how do we keep our photography meaningful? Not to anybody else necessarily, but to ourselves, in an age where, I think I read something that was something like 14 billion photos taken last year. I might be a couple of billion out, but something insane like that. How do we make our photos matter at all to anybody? I mean, but at least hopefully they can matter to you. And I think that's really important as a starting point, because if they don't matter to you, then you're kind of doomed from the start.
As much as I wouldn't trust a statistic like that, because I personally have never been surveyed on how many photos that I've taken, I think I would be adding a significant, probably 7-figure number to that. It feels like based on some of the work that I've had to do over the last couple of years. One thing I would say is that should not be a defeatist point for a lot of people, where I think it would be. They would be like, well, if there's that many pictures, what's the point? The point is you shouldn't be looking externally for validation and for your reason to take a photo. Your photo should mean something to you, and then that's perfect. That's all that really matters. Chasing outside attention isn't going to fulfill you, because it's a diminishing thing. Because when you get 15 likes on a photo, then you want 30. When you get 30, then you want 50, then you want 100. And every time you reach a new number, I've said this before, I think there's something really genetically biblical about social media. You've got followers, you've got a surrogate for disciples. You've got this idea that you have a quantifiable measure of how liked someone is, and it's kind of like a bastardization of common sense, because the best photographer in the world, whoever that may be, might not be on Instagram. Therefore, the whole idea is completely devoid of any of any common sense. You're basically saying, well, I need to be the best of the people that are capable of seeing me on this app that not everyone's using, who choose to follow art forms it just becomes stupid. It's just it's a chasing your own tail logic. And I worry when that app disappears, what people are going to do with their lives. If I'm okay to turn a corner though here really quickly, there's a few things I'm quite fascinated about with you in particular. And I wouldn't normally ask these questions, but I actually feel like with you, it's going to be an interesting point.
Now I'm nervous.
Well, what does a street photograph have to impact on you? So you said you curate your social media so that you're seeing the stuff that's going to inspire you. What makes you stop in your tracks when you see a street photograph? What does it have to do for you?
Okay. I'd love to say I've thought about this and I have a perfect answer, but I think that for me, what I love about street photography, or good for me, what is good street photography, is the alchemy of turning something mundane into something extraordinary. It might be beautiful, it might be shocking, it might be striking, but I think it's the transformational process that is really important to me in an image. It's that transformation that creates the jolt and creates the sort of the sense of excitement that I think that we glean from looking at from a great photograph. And I think, one of the things that I do think is important, or I think can really add to a really powerful street photograph is when you can really kind of palpably sense the intentionality of the photographer. So that's where I've been kind of very belatedly, and I feel so embarrassed in a way at how kind of unaware I have been until the last couple of years of the kind of extraordinary history of photography and the richness of everything that's gone before and the pioneers at different moments. And I've really been kind of like wallowing in that for the last couple of years and feeling like I really should have done it ages ago. But kind of what I found really fascinating was that kind of I could get that jolt from pictures that inherently appeared to share almost nothing in terms of their style, in terms of their approach. So, for example, so the photographer that probably has given me the biggest jolt of excitement is Harry Grier, the Belgian photographer. And he's just like insane use of color, and kind of these just wonderful moments of sort of kind of absurd serendipity that come together in his photography, and they're often sort of, it's always kind of almost always about people, and it's very vivid and very alive and very kind of a freezing of a moment, often with a kind of a real sense of energy and movement within them, like quite like kind of Alex Webb in that sense. And then a couple of months ago, I was reading Evelyn Hoffer's book on New York, and she took all of her pictures with a large, or most of her pictures with a large format camera. So obviously you get really almost none of that sense of movement or sort of, kind of energy or tension in the same way. And one of her pictures that I remember is like basically just a picture down the tracks from one of the empty kind of subway tracks from one of the kind of the New York subway stations. There's no people in it, and for me, most of the time, I love my pictures to have people in. But that same sense of intentionality and that same real sense of trying to portray the kind of just the sort of that flash of extraordinariness in mundanity, and here it was sort of the lines and the curve of the track and all the rest of it. They were so strong in both images, in both, or kind of both sets of work, that I kind of got a similar jolt of excitement, and so I think that for me is really important. and then of course, there are technicalities and all the rest of it, but I don't necessarily think a photo does have to be technically perfect to be a great photo. But I think it's about understanding what the photographer is trying to show you. And also that sort of that transformation, that alchemic sense of something very mundane being turned into something just for a brief split second of something extraordinary, and then capturing that moment, and that moment being kind of existing, therefore kind of, forever. And that I love. Did I answer your question at all then?
You absolutely did. It was thoroughly answered. I enjoyed that. In terms of your photography, what's the most important compositional tool that you use?
God, my answer to that would be so different now to what it was 2 or 3 months ago, or 6 months ago. Now I would say that I've started shooting. Well, I've kind of dabbled and sort of flapped between different focal lengths, but now I'm mainly shooting 28 and 35, and I really kind of feel now that kind of quite at peace, which is not to say I won't ever shoot any other focal length, but I feel very at peace with those 2 focal lengths helping me kind of portray the vision that I want to portray. And so a lot of it now is about trying to capture movement and a sense of dynamism. So in a way, composition has become slightly less rigid and less important to me. Before, I was very much much more interested in capturing sort of crystallized lines and moments, and kind of that it would have this sort of it makes it sound so pompous, but this kind of like formal grace to it. That was kind of what I was trying to capture. Whereas now I think I'm kind of trying to more capture sort of the dynamism of a moment, and to capture feelings, to capture, I want you to kind of, I've been doing a lot of photography just recently through kind of necessity of, kind of Swedish early summer, and there've been a few kind of trips down to the lake and people, chucking themselves off kind of piers into the water and blah, 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 and trying to capture that sense of heat and that sense of energy. And, one thing that I've kind of done a lot of is kind of taking pictures of my kids basically. But then, trying to capture childhood. And for a long time, I guess if I looked at my photos, I was very much capturing sort of this sort of almost picture book sense of childhood, where it would be like, you might be in a beautiful forest and all these sort of wonderful lines of trees, and kind of, my kids would be, I would never pose them, but, they'd happen to be on this sort of little kind of rock, and, it would all work compositionally quite well. And now I'm much more interested in trying to capture the sense of them rushing around like lunatics through my photography. It feels much more kind of honest to me, and it feels much closer to the sort of vision that, and also, I suppose it goes back to sort of that sort of sense of journalism and reportage, which is kind of where I came into photography. So I feel briefly, at least, quite at peace with what I'm trying to do in terms of, less of a focus on composition, more of a focus on feelings and energy and movement and dynamism.
I get the impression you're not a fan of black and white.
No, probably one of the pictures I'm most proud of taking, I converted into black and white. It's actually one I very recently put up on my Instagram after a conversation with someone about kind of photos that sort of changed your kind of photographic journey because they sort of, you kind of realize what you could achieve. And that was in black and white. And I still look at it and I still, feel proud that I was able to take that photo. But no, I do not see the world in black and white. I see the world in color. Which is not to say I don't admire kind of black and white photography. I think some of it's absolutely wonderful, but to me, the world is a colorful place. And actually, one of the things that really frustrated me for a long time in my own photography is that I see the world as a colorful place, but I think like a lot of people, I've kind of got caught up in this sort of slightly, melancholic, washed out, monochrome sort of style. But also, I think that that's also reflective of how a lot of us kind of maybe feel a little bit in the world as well. This sort of slightly depressive look at the world. And so I was shooting color photography, but not getting any satisfaction from the colors that I was generating, largely because of the way I was, maybe the kind of in-camera settings that I had, or the way I was post-processing them. And I was a bit like, I was sort of stuck between this world of, almost shooting color in monochrome, and
right.
feeling that was not satisfying me. And actually shooting film has been really helpful to me to kind of help me learn more about what I want to try and do with color, and to, you know, to understand how I want to use color to express the way I see color, which is I see repetitions of color. I see, I love color play, just when I see it in life anyway. And so it feels good to now be able to sort of tie those to what I see to kind of how I'm able to sort of produce the photograph together in a way that I feel works, and I feel is not sort of, you know, OTT. It's not just about whacking saturation up. It's about actually having a stylistic approach to color. And again, maybe it's been trickier for me to figure that out because I haven't had any sort of formal training in how to use color from a kind of any artistic background, of no graphic design, no anything. And any attempts that people did make to teach me that stuff in the past, I kind of, at school and stuff, I rejected it because I was like, this is boring, I'm not interested in. And now I feel stupid for doing that because I wish I had paid attention, because then it would probably be have been a lot easier for me to figure out how to use color in my photography, because it's so important to me and so important to my photography.
Do you set out with, you seem to me to come across as someone that's not a big chaos theory fan. Do you set out with set ideas in mind of what you're going to try and achieve with your camera? Or are you someone that's more just situationally open to whatever might come at you?
I'd say both, in the sense that I have, I very much I very much attempt to see this as an improving exercise. Photography as a whole is an improving exercise. So I will set out to go and, kind of work on certain techniques or work on certain approaches. And, kind of when I've looked at kind of other photographers that have influenced me to try and work out how I can kind of bring that into my work. And that, that takes practice. That takes lots of taking bad photos to start kind of crafting the sort of kind of vision that you want to. So in that sense, yes, I do set myself challenges, and I try and educate myself, and to a degree, I'm a fairly disorganized person, but to a degree, I've taken a relatively sort of educational and formalized approach to trying to teach myself to be a better photographer. And that clearly then informs how I kind of go out and shoot. On the other hand, both because of the realities of my life, I've got 2 young kids, I've got a job and all the rest of it, that, a lot of my shooting is done on the way to work, or, on the way back from work, or on my lunch break. I don't very often, and at the weekends I want to be with my family, so I don't kind of very often kind of create spaces, and certainly not recently, to kind of just be able to go and just shoot. So then it's much more about kind of grabbing the moments as they come, but then trying to make sure that I grab those moments in ways that reflect where I'm trying to take my photography. And I think I'm starting to be increasingly more selective about the sort of photographs, not necessarily that I take, but certainly then the photographs that I take forward after having taken them, in terms of, is this what I'm trying to do with my photography? It's not necessarily that I'll delete the others, but I'll be just like, okay, right now, that's not what I'm trying to do with my photography. But one of the reasons that I love street photography so much is that it is something that you can do in those lost little moments during a busy day and a busy life. And, often those moments that actually can be quite challenging to us when, we're going to work, or we're coming back from work, or, when you can kind of lose yourself and you can go into quite a negative space in your head, or you just stare kind of blankly at your phone. But actually those are the moments now, but because of photography, my head's up, my eyes are open. I'm looking for those kind of those moments. And then, it is also absolutely about that just kind of sheer excitement of getting that moment where you can have like a completely mundane commute, and you snapped a few rubbish pictures of people just walking past something, and you're just like, oh, none of this is quite working. And then something will just happen on the way back, and you'll be like, oh, cool. I got that one shot. So it's a bit of both, but I suppose, I think Harry Greer, he talked about kind of the pressing of the shutter as being a sort of kind of orgasmic moment. And I kind of, whilst I don't want to kind of get too graphic, I get that, in the sense that I think that when you see those moments come together, and you press the shutter and you capture that moment, it's a massive rush. And I wouldn't get that. I didn't get that from, I've had moments when I've sort of shot landscapes and blah, 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 and where you're kind of very much more sort of measured in your approach. And you plan, if you want to be a great landscape photographer, I imagine you have to plan, a huge amount and all the rest of it. But I definitely like that sort of, that the huge rush of something totally unexpected happening and you being able to capture it. So yeah, kind of a bit of both.
I sort of a two-part question here. Can you work on improving your photography between shooting? And if so, how?
God, yes. Yes, 100% yes. I mean, I think I actually, like an awful lot of things in life, I think you sometimes become better in the moments when you're not doing them. I actually, on the one hand, absolutely, I agree. The reason that I have become kind of a photographer that I am comfortable with, I want to get better every day, but, I'm happy with the level I'm at the moment, and that, kind of people enjoy my work, which is really nice. One of the reasons is because I've taken so many bloody photos, and you only need to ask my wife about that, because she will attest to that with kind of like a roll of the eyes. So of course you need to, but I also think that, like anything, you can just keep on shooting and shooting and shooting and shooting. And if you're not, but this comes back to intentionality. If you're just shooting and you're not thinking about what you're trying to do with it, then the likelihood is that you won't get better, or you may actually even end up taking yourself, and I think I've been guilty of this, taking myself in directions that I didn't even really want to go with my photography because I'm just shooting. And then it's, in the last year or two, it's when I've actually, in a way, yes, I still I shoot every day, but I take far fewer photos now than I ever did. And I think far more about my photography. I mean, in the end, like before I used to kind of just take loads of photos, but not think about photography. And now I take fewer photos, but I think about photography all the time. It's like, I just kind of like, oh my God, like, well, maybe I could do that, or maybe I should, or maybe I should explore that photographer, or I kind of hear someone referencing that, but I'll look that up and blah, blah, but I think that has made me a vastly much kind of better photographer. My photography has gone forward so much more because you've taken time to step back and reflect, and to look at your photography, and to look at your approaches, and to look at, to look at your gear. I mean, like, I know we're not allowed to, you're not allowed to talk about gear because it's not about the gear, but to a degree, you also need to kind of, think about what sort of photography do you want to do and what's the right gear for doing that. And look at other, I mean, of course, look at other photographers. I mean, buying photo books has been, the single, and it's cliched, and so many people have said it, but it's such a brilliant way to become a better photographer and get to own these extraordinary objects, which you can come back to and enjoy over and over again. So yeah, I mean, but it's, I've also found that with language learning, in the sense that, I've been, like, the last 5 years trying to learn Swedish. And there've been times when I've been speaking a lot of Swedish and just feeling like it's not getting any better. And I'm tired because maybe I'm stressed from work, and I can't get my shit together, and I can't get my head together. And I just feel like, oh my God, my Swedish is going backwards. And then I might, go away and not talk Swedish for a week, 2 weeks, because I'm hanging out with kind of English speaking friends or whatever, and just not think about it. Or I might get some rest, blah, blah, blah. And I suddenly come back and I actually find that my Swedish has gone kind of forwards again, because I've just given myself a bit of a break. So I think that that's really important, that you give your kind of creative muscles a break kind of sometimes, and just, allow them to recover, allow yourself to take a breath, to look at what you're trying to do with your photography, and to then kind of, be more intentional, be more thoughtful about where you take it next.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest mistake being made by aspiring photographers, and pretty much any aspiring creative, is just not taking the time to develop taste. And you mentioning photo books, I think, is the perfect example of that. People should be surrounding themselves with stuff that's exciting. There's a really great quote I saw the other day, which said that if you surround yourself, so if you're around 5 confident people, you become the 6th. If you're around 5 intelligent people, you become the 6th. And if you're around 5 immature people, you become the 6th. And I think as much as being around the people has that influence, also being around the work, and, curating your social media feeds to only show you stuff that inspires you, and buying photo books, having prints, having things that push your subconscious in the direction that you want your conscious thought to go, makes the biggest difference.
Definitely. And can be, I think it's really easy to think that it's sort of somehow it's not exciting. that side of it. That's the sort of the kind of the boring side of it. But I suspect that subconsciously that's probably what I thought for a long time, when I was just thinking, I'm just going to teach myself by clicking away, and and then critiquing, of course, my own photos and saying that didn't work and that did work and blah, blah, blah. And then, getting feedback from people and friends and other people about what they liked and what they didn't. But kind of the rest of it all just felt a bit sort of extraneous, a bit like, oh, I didn't need to do that. But actually, it's so exciting discovering the power of photography, of other people's photography, and realizing that, well, okay, you're not necessarily going to be able to do that, but actually that if you are devoted enough, and also if you are analytical enough to be able to sort of unpick how they have created that image, and that you also then have the technical skills. And I think that's where the kind of shooting thousands of pictures does help, because you need to have that kind of that technical foundation to be able to then turn what you see in an image, either someone else's image or the image that's in front of you, into reality. But actually to kind of be able to sort of convert to be able to sort of kind of process what you see in other people's work and let that inform your own work. I think that's incredibly exciting. And, photo books that I almost get like kind of that kind of a sort of a feeling, your stomach kind of almost drops a little bit. Sometimes you just get that kind of like feeling when you look at other people's work. And part of it is like, crap, I'd never be able to take that photo. It's too brilliant. But the other part of it is just the excitement of the possibilities of photography and opening yourself up to that. And also, as you say, taste, establishing what for you as a photographer you're trying to achieve is really important. And that, I think also that, but then that can be a danger, because if you look at, you can look at, there's so many images we can look at these days, and I can look at some incredible landscape photography and be like, oh my God, that's amazing. And then a tiny part of you is like, right, I want to go and shoot a fantastic landscape photograph. And you're like, hang on, but actually that's something complete. That's not what I'm trying to do. And that it's taken more time to just be like, okay, that's not my thing. It's amazing. I love it, but it's not my thing. My thing is trying to get good at this more, whatever, candid kind of reportage, documentary, street, whatever you want to call it, style. So yeah, it's kind of, I think, but you mentioned the word mature or immaturity. And I think, there is a degree to which maturity is important. And I don't think, that's necessarily at all to do with age. I think it's a lot to do with your sort of photographic journey and also putting away things like caring too much about likes and kind of recognition on social media and all the rest of it. Because once you actually can put that to bed to some degree, then I think you feel much freer to explore where you want your photography to take you.
Mm-hmm. I've got two more relatively broad questions for you. And then I'll let you go. I really do appreciate you taking the time to do this. My first question is, like, in a very broad sense, what is the emotional message of your work?
Gosh. I think it's probably changed. I think that one of the reasons that I started doing more street photography was partly because I was, street photography is not always in urban spaces, but it often is. And I was living in, urban spaces. And I'm not actually, lots of street photographers love the kind of energy and buzz of cities. And that's actually not something that I necessarily have. I've often felt quite kind of isolated in urban spaces and found them quite melancholic places. And I think that probably for a long time, my kind of photography was probably reflecting quite strongly my emotional state in urban spaces, and I think that that's still the case. And then you can kind of look at the pictures I've taken of my kids when I probably feel like I'm in a safer environment, and they probably come across as sort of more vibrant and upbeat in terms of the sort of the emotional tone of them. I think more recently I've been trying to sort of explore tackling kind of trying to explore sort of more positivity in my images, and trying to kind of capture sort of more sort of dynamism in the sort of kind of humanity, and trying to capture a lot of the energy that I'm increasingly seeing, and also using photography as a way to transform my own relationship to the way that I see the world. Because if we say that what we photograph reflects who we are or how we feel, then obviously as we change how we feel, then our photography is likely to change. But I also wonder whether one can, to a degree, change how one feels by changing the style of one's photography. And that's something that I'm kind of exploring a little bit at the moment, to try and, to kind of force myself into a more kind of energetic and positive and dynamic view of the world and the reality that we live in. So I think that kind of, I'm on a bit of a journey in terms of the sort of the emotional impact I want my work to convey. But my work is all about people and humans in an environment, and that I think was always going to kind of be very central to my work, and how they relate to the environment they're in, even if they're not aware that they're relating to that environment in that way. So that is kind of that's a very big part of it for me.
And my last question, what you think your worst habit is as a photographer?
Worst habit as a photographer. I feel like I've got so many. I think, actually, do you know what, going back, I think probably one of my worst habits as a photographer, and I think is something that I'm getting better at, is I'm taking fewer photos. Now I used to take loads and loads of photos, style all over the place. And it really bothered me. Cause I couldn't feel like I could settle on a style. And I think that's something that's really, and kind of frustrated me as a photographer kind of really since I started. And I feel like I'm slowly now getting better at that I'm being much more selective about what I shoot, how I shoot it. And I remember listening to an interview with Joshua K. Jackson and someone asking this question, like, how do you develop a style? And he just said, go out and shoot and you'll find the style developing. And I couldn't, and I wouldn't believe him on that. I was like, no, you have to really think about it. But actually, in a funny way, I think that's more, is what I'm doing at the moment. I'm kind of just going out and shooting, but I'm more comfortable with just instinctively following my instincts as a photographer, not trying to copy other people. So maybe that was my worst my worst trait, but I've got better at it, which hopefully is a sign of some improvement. My other worst habit as a photographer, which I'm totally cured of now and I'm really proud of, is vignetting. I used to vignette the crap out of everything, and I now don't. And I'm really proud. I had a long conversation with my photographic guru, a friend of mine, one of the people who really inspired me to get into photography. He was like, Jonny, please stop putting vignette on all your photos. And I wrote back to him and I was like, I'm sorry, Kris, vignetting, it's just part of my photography, and I'm fine with it. So we're not going to talk about this any further. And about 3 months later, literally, and this is probably only about 6 months ago, maybe not even that long, about 3 months later, I woke up in the morning. I literally woke up one morning and was like, I'm not going to vignette anymore. And I haven't. I've vignetted like 2 pictures since then. And I'm really proud of myself.
We need to make sure that everyone knows where they can find your heavily vignetted work. So your website, your social media links, where can people find you?
Yeah, so I've got 2. Says the person who's saying you shouldn't be kind of a slave to Instagram. I've got 2 Instagram feeds. One is jonny.hoggphotog, and that used to be where I put everything, and now is more where I put kind of my personal stuff. So I'm kind of afraid I've got quite a lot of pictures of my kids and all the rest of it. But I felt a bit uncomfortable with this kind of constant blending of street and my kids, and street and my kids. So I've now started a new feed where it's more, much more kind of intentionally curated, but it's still has been quite retrospective, because I started with posting photos that I took, a year, 2 years ago, and I'm kind of building back. But that's called These Streets of Ours, and that's also on Instagram. And then you can also find, I think, on my Instagram, a link to my website, which is Jonny Hogg Photography. So please do check it out if you get a chance. I'd be thrilled.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this incredibly insightful conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been an absolute honour and a privilege to be asked to be on, and I hope I have made some sense at some point.